All right, Jonathan, I thought we'd take a look at the internet weather for this week. A few new things to take a look at that cropped up this week. And so this is the most probe ports. This is the ports that have had the most scanning, irrespective of how many people are actually doing it, but just sheer volume of scanning. And so it doesn't really tell us much about botnets usually, but it tells us about just general trends. So port 8089 I highlighted here because that went up 11 positions. It was somewhere down below the top 10 line before. We'll take a look at what's going on there. Some other ones that I would make mention of is the Ethereum wallet, port 8545 is still out there. That's one that we've talked about a lot. Still a small number of sources aggressively scanning for vulnerable Ethereum wallets with that GETH protocol. And then this one also we're going to take a look at in more detail in the ScanSIPs one, port 34567, interesting port number, 34567, because that one's also got some interesting activity. But before we do that, let's take a quick look at port 8089. And we've talked about this on the show before. This one is scanning. We'll take a closer look at what we're actually seeing here. But it's actually a very small number of scan sources, like less than 50, but they're in the number 3 position, but there's only 40 scan sources. I can tell you that up here, these two guys, they have hundreds of thousands of scan sources. This one I think has 20,000, another 20,000. So this guy here with like 40 to 50 doing this much scanning activity is pretty significant for a small number of scan sources to be that aggressive. One thing we did notice is most of the activity is coming out of the Netherlands. It accounts for 96% of all the scanning activity on this report. And you can see over the past year here, it's kind of gone from relatively nothing to some recurring patterns here. These recurring patterns are actually the US ones that I have marked here, which is actually Census, which is a internet scanning. They're a lot like Shodan. You can go research their website, but they scan the internet regularly. So that I would consider that good guy activity scanning to just try to find out who's out there, who's got this port open. But some of this other more chunky stuff going on later on here is mostly related to these actors in the Netherlands. And I think last time I showed this chart, I thought this might be related to Splunkd, but what I found out is it's actually related to PHPMyAdmin. So I guess PHPMyAdmin must listen on port 8089, and we see a lot of activity here where they're scanning for a bunch of different URLs that are related to PHPMyAdmin. This is just a handful of them. I didn't do everyone, but it scans for probably, it looked like 40 or 50 different variations of that, looking for very common PHPMyAdmin paths, maybe trying to find ones that are vulnerable or exposed so that they could be compromised. So that's what that stuff is about. Go ahead.
They didn't even bother to change the user agent. There's like
yeah, it's just Python. Yeah, they're using some Python script to probably scan over and over again. So that's what that is about. I don't know really what to make of it other than security with PHPMyAdmin. Make sure it's up to date. I'm not sure if there's any specific vulnerability out there that that they're specifically seeking, but they seem to be hitting a really widespread of many different PHPMyAdmin URLs across many different versions over time. So anyway. And that PHPMyAdmin, by the way, if people don't know, is usually a tool it's a PHP script for administering your MySQL database. So I forgot to mention that. So these ones usually show us a little bit more related to botnet related stuff, because this is most sources probing. So this is where we have a lot of sources scanning on a particular port and protocol at the same time simultaneously. And that usually indicates to us that there's something up there. So the two that I highlighted this week that kind of stood out, obviously this stands out. We talked about it on the last one because it was on the last chart as well. But it's more so dramatic in terms of scan sources involved. And that's that 34567. And then the port 5555 TCP is also up 5 positions, which is related to the Android debugger service. So we'll take a look at the first one here. And you can really see this one really presents well from the ScanSIPs perspective. So what we see is that real typical sawtooth waveform where you get the botnet issuing a command to all the bots to start scanning, and they all start at one time, and then the ones with really good bandwidth finish their jobs early, really quick, and the ones with worse bandwidth take longer to finish, and you kind of get this decay, and then it repeats, and then it issues the command again, and they keep doing that over and over again. So at peaks here, we're getting like maybe 8,000 scan sips per hour, maybe just shy of that at the peak here. And this was, I guess, we're looking at 60 days. This is back in July timeframe. And recently, within the past few days here, it's really ramped up. So it's gone up to about 16,000 scan sips per hour.
You can see people are scanning for devices of this sort. You can see that they are able to exploit them and using them as botnets. So if you do go buy one of these devices, just make sure, is it exposed to the internet? If it is exposed to the internet, am I making sure that it's only accessible to me?
This scanning appears to be related to one of these OEM DVR security cameras. So there's a lot of these out there.
Yep.
And it's not clear to me which one they're talking about because I see a lot of people referencing it with a lot of different vendors. Yeah. And I think a lot of those security camera DVRs, there's like one person who manufactures it with the source code and everything, and then people just put boom, they stack it, put their own brand label on it, and they ship it out, but it's all the same underlying code. I'm not positive, but that's what it looks like. And they appear to list it on port 34567. And when I looked in our honeypot, we can see the scanning activity. It's not HTTP. There's some encoded stuff here that I just kind of gloss over, so to speak. But then there's a JSON blob that gets passed in. Each line here is a new attempt from our honeypot that we have. And it looks like it says login type dvrip web. Not really sure what that is. I tried to Google it and I found more hits for these DVRs, but then you see a password, which looks like a 8-character, maybe base 64 character set type of thing. Like alphanumeric, basically.
But it looks like it's the same, so...
Yeah, it does, you're right. It looks like there's a few common ones here. I didn't even realize that until you just pointed that out.
So are they trying... Is there a default, but just a set of defaults?
It could be that there's some set of defaults out there. I didn't really I didn't notice that until you just pointed it out here with a username of admin. Right. So to me, it looks like they're either trying a lot of different ones, or there is some small set of passwords that they're trying here, and maybe that gets them in.
Hoping to get in, yeah.
Apparently, it looks like it's probably successful because, as we can see, they went from basically nothing to a lot. And I did the source IPs, which I don't show here, are related to these actors that are showing up in that big spike there. So it looks like somebody's been actively brute force password guessing against them with maybe a narrow set of passwords and having some success because it's gone up really quickly in terms of the number of scan sources involved.
It's common with these devices that that's the only way for you to be able to view it. So, if you're a small business, you need some type of security system. You buy it, you install it, and you're like, well, I need to be able to see it from my house.
Right, like maybe it's your store, maybe you have like a store, a little small business, and you want to, I can understand that, but I would also say, try to somehow protect it. Like I would, if it was me, I would set up some sort of VPN service, so I have to VPN into it to look at it or whatever.
Right.
And then the last one is this port 5555 TCP Android debug bridge. We actually covered this on the show in an earlier segment, talking about there is a new botnet that's actively exploiting this. One of many. There's a couple of Mirai variants out there already targeting this, so it's kind of, there's a bunch of different botnets all trying to find devices that have this Android debug bridge open. They're vying for control of the, some 30,000 or whatever vulnerable devices that are out there. And this is yet another guy in the game. It looks like he had maybe a little bit of a success spike here, where he went from, the noise floor is maybe between 7,000 and 9,000 botnets on a given day.
Yeah.
And we jumped up to maybe 14,000 or so scanning for this. So I'm not quite sure how to attribute that, if that's related to Ares or not. But it has since gone back down again. And then I just have a note here about August 28th. They came out, I think this is, I forget, I think this might be ZDNet or one of those guys, had an article on this new Ares botnet and how it's been spreading. So that probably attributes to this increase in activity we're seeing on this port.
Yeah, I wonder if Google in this case can build in some type of maybe timeout or something where it disables debugging after a certain amount of time, or something where, you know, do you really need it always up? Like I assume.
Yeah, that's a good point. Maybe in a future version, but the problem is there's probably a lot of devices out there that are not getting upgraded, and they never will.
Yes.
You've got to wait for end of life of them to be taken off, and that somebody puts a new one in.
Right.
Because a lot of these devices, I think, are these embedded set-top boxes,
right.
things that people don't think to patch as often.
And they don't. They don't automatically patch. You just sit there.
Yeah, you've got a lighter touch on those than you would with your phone or your computer, where you usually get like notifications. There's updates available and whatnot. A set-top box or some sort of appliance like that, you probably aren't going to get any kind of notification about software updates available. So who knows whether it'll ever get patched or fixed. So
don't expose your debugging ports to the internet.
No. Yeah. And if you're a vendor with Android, you know, use Android as your underlying operating system for your appliance or your embedded device, don't leave it on by accident and ship it out into the field, because that would be really bad. So that's about it for this week. That's the only thing I thought was interesting.
Cool. Thank you.
Yep.